So there are quite a number of questions about general aspects of Parkinson's disease, so I'll go through them a little bit. So one question was, at this time, what can be done if early detection of Parkinson's disease is discovered? So this is related to my talk earlier about how important it is that we have better measures or ways to detect Parkinson's disease at a very early state. So, and also in my talk, I talked about the ongoing efforts to look at neuroprotective strategies. So a lot of things are have been tested and are still being tested to look at this question of what can either prevent or slow down the progression of disease. And a lot of the studies that we have are somewhat inconclusive or haven't really been successful. And I think that part of it is that sometimes we're trying these neuroprotective strategies or testing them a little bit too late. So again, the idea is the earlier on we can detect the disease, catch the brain at a healthier state, the better chance it has of really protecting those good neurons that are still healthy and viable. So these things have to happen in parallel, both the detection of the disease, finding better methods of that, as well as finding the ways to prevent progression. They have to go on simultaneously, and again, it's a cycle, one feeds into the other. So short answer is that we don't have anything that's proven at this point to stop or slow down the progression of the disease, but we do know of certain things that might be beneficial. So for example, exercise and having a healthy lifestyle, I think there's a lot of evidence now that's accumulating that in itself can be beneficial and protective of the brain. So certainly there have been a lot of studies that looked at exercise in slowing down or preventing being associated with less chance of developing dementia later on. There's studies in Parkinson's specifically where exercise seems to enhance brain activity. So that's certainly something that all of us can do. In terms of drugs or actual treatments, we are still looking at those.
I'm just going to take this opportunity to introduce Linda Reese. Linda's a researcher who works with Dr. Goldman, who spoke earlier. He's unable to take the questions and answers, so Linda will address his questions.
One of the questions we had was about what level of TCE exposure was associated with a higher incidence of Parkinson's disease. Now, I'd just like to explain in the study that was done with the twins, it was a fairly small group of twins that had been exposed to TCE. So the only way we could get a statistical significance was to look at the ones that had been most exposed. And that was a significant occupational exposure. And we collected it historically, so we asked them, have you had that type of job and for how long did you hold it? So in the group that we found an increased risk in, they had worked in those high-risk professions for maybe 20 years. However, this particular agent is very toxic. It can go in through your skin, through your by inhalation, and there have been some other studies that were more like cluster studies that looked at specific occupations where they knew they'd had a significant exposure, and they found they found 3 people with Parkinson's disease and 14 others with motor symptoms. So Dr. Goldman's advice is just to stay away from the stuff.
So there's a question on whether there's very active research done in other countries and whether we share information amongst each other. And do research centers worldwide specialize in different areas? So I did my postdoctoral training at the Medical Research Council Protein Phosphorylation Unit in Scotland, which is where I started working on LRRK2. So there is quite a bit of active research being done in other countries. And the nature of science is that we do share information in many ways. I just got back from a Fox Foundation meeting where there were people from all over the world, Italy, Scotland, Spain, and we openly shared information amongst each other. And this is one of the things about the Parkinson's Institute is this is one of the only places where we do specialize solely in Parkinson's specific basic science research, as well as the clinical side. And so all over the world, wherever people are doing research, it might just be one researcher or two that would be specializing in neurodegenerative disease. But what we have here is quite a different story. We do engage in information sharing, but this might be one of the few places in the world where we can actually specifically look at Parkinson's disease and the biochemical mechanisms by which it arises. So yes, we do share information, and there are other researchers everywhere that will look at LRRK2 or any other aspect of the biochemical bases for disease, and we do share information. So, but one of the problems is that science is an iterative process, and it's called research for a reason. We have to redo a lot of things. And as I tried to underscore the fact with LRRK2, it was just discovered in 2004 that it was associated with disease. Before that, there were no publications on the enzyme, and now there's over 500. So we have to sift through the chaff and get the good data out of the bad, and you know, make our progress based on that. So, yep.
Someone asked, they referenced the Eli Lilly, the recent Eli Lilly Alzheimer's trial failure of a gamma secretase inhibitor. Several companies, not just Eli Lilly, but a great number of companies are targeting amyloid aggregation. So that's another protein, another disease. It may be similar. The Lilly trial failed. That's the second trial they've had of a gamma secretase inhibitor, I believe, that failed. There's several questions about it. Were they studying people too late in the disease? It's a very different disease than Parkinson's disease. So it's discouraging, especially when a company invests that amount of money in a drug and to bring to a phase 3 clinical trial. But I don't think by any means that it means an end to a study of these aggregating proteins in Alzheimer's or in Parkinson's.
The first question is making those lines. I mean, every line that we put into our pipeline in making a new pluripotent stem cells, we're successful so far. So we can make stem cells out of patient skin cells. And we are just in the process of refining the differentiation. So one issue there is that in the differentiation process, you get very different cell population. So at the end, you don't only have the dopamine-producing cells. On that slide, you've seen a few green dots, but not the whole culture dish is full of dopaminergic neurons. So that's something that we are refining and reworking right now. So we haven't started full-blown looking at disease mechanisms yet.
I'll answer one question was raised about the percentage of costs for administration and fundraising versus research. I can answer the question a little bit easier by saying about 20% of our costs are for administration and fundraising, and about 80% are for the programs. Generally, the research grants from NIH or Michael J. Fox pay direct costs, plus they pay a percentage of other costs. So it's very difficult to say exactly where a dollar goes within the organization. Within our organization, because of the grants we get from the government, we are less reliant on individual donations or foundation donations for a lot of our expenses. But there are certain expenses we have that aren't covered by grants. For example, the clinic. The clinic has very little funding from other sources besides donations and general operating revenue. So a little bit tricky, but we're pretty good. In terms of fundraising expenses versus program expenses, we are on the low side, which is the good side. Some organizations have as high as 80% of fundraising and administration to program expenses. Some are as low as maybe 5%, but they don't. They just don't have many fundraising expenses. They are funded by other people. So I think we're in pretty good shape. If you're concerned about where the waste in an organization is and so forth, we are fairly efficient and stack up very well against other organizations.
So there were some questions regarding brain surgery for Parkinson's disease. And there is an an approved type of brain surgery called deep brain stimulation that's been used for Parkinson's disease for probably about 10 years now. It was first developed in Europe and was approved here by the FDA roughly about 5 or 6 years ago. So it's been in use, and thousands and thousands of patients throughout the world have had the surgery. We know it is effective for treating certain aspects of Parkinson's disease, specifically the typical motor aspects of tremor, stiffness, and slowness can be relieved by the surgery. It's not necessarily better than medication. So if you have fairly good function on the medication, at least some of the time, if that's your best level of function, the surgery can probably bring you up to that point. However, the main purpose of the surgery at this time is to help expand or increase the amount of good time that you have. So it's primarily been used for people who have a lot of these fluctuations on and off periods or excessive dyskinesia. So people who are a little further along where the medications aren't controlling the symptoms completely. Now, the surgery is not beneficial for other aspects of the disease. So, for example, balance problems or falls or gait freezing may or may not improve with the surgery. Speech problems may get somewhat worse. Sometimes some swallowing difficulties can occur. And there is a little bit of concern or question about how much it affects your thinking and memory and cognition. So there are certainly... It's important to see a Parkinson's specialist to evaluate what criteria in your particular case may be a good prognostic sign or bad prognostic sign for the surgery. And we do recommend a very thorough evaluation at one of the major surgical centers. So it's not something you want to take lightly. There's a little bit of question right now in the field about how soon to get the surgery. Again, up to this point, it's been primarily used for people who have more advanced Parkinson's, who have complications of the drugs, but there is a little bit of a shift or more research into what happens if you do it earlier. So again, it's not as simple as cataract surgery. It is brain surgery. They're implanting something inside the brain, so you have to weigh the risks and the benefits very carefully, and this is something that you need to talk over with your neurologist or a movement disorder specialist.
I have a question about whether it's true that caffeine is good for Parkinson's disease. So there have been several studies that have shown an inverse association with caffeine intake, and that association was stronger in men than in women. But and it's linear, so the more caffeine you drink, the association goes down. But we have no evidence that caffeine affects the course of Parkinson's disease.
What are the prospects for stem cell research? So we have already enrolled 54 individuals in our study. So we have a fairly big bank of these skin cells. At this point, we are interested in a few more individuals who might want to participate, and we have specific research criteria. So one is age at onset between 50 and 60 years. And the second is this patient should be diagnosed with sporadic Parkinson's disease, so no atypical form of the disease. And then the other question, if you take it in a much wider perspective, who could receive stem cell therapies in the future? I think that's really not quite so easy to decide at this point. And probably initially there will be clinical trials, and there are specific criteria for people that could be enrolled and some people that you want to exclude. So that's not quite clear at this point.
The patch for Parkinson's disease. So there was a treatment for Parkinson's in a patch form called rotigotine. It's in the class of drugs that's a dopamine agonist, and it was available for a short period of time, but it got recalled because of some questions about the formulation and stability of the patch. So we don't know for sure. Our understanding is that the company is still working on making it a more stable formulation and working with the FDA to make it available and effective. So we don't know when it's coming, but as far as we know, it will be sometime released again once those questions are resolved. There was another follow-up question. Are there any herbal supplements that can help Parkinson's? There are certainly a lot of herbal supplements out there, and a lot entirely proven, again, to treat Parkinson's or slow down progression of Parkinson's, because there just aren't that many, sort of large studies doing the careful science behind it. So there are a lot of anecdotes, certainly, where people say, oh, I took this and it helped me feel better, or it improved my energy, and so on. But until you actually look at it in a large group of people with controls and with a placebo, you don't know if it's from that agent or if it's sort of just a placebo effect. So the short answer is, again, we don't know for sure if there are any herbal supplements that help Parkinson's. And for creatine, it is, and CoQ10, those are things that are available already, again, at your health food store. It's over the counter. We are doing the studies because we need to show that it has both safety for Parkinson's and benefit. The current creatine study is using a dose of 5 grams twice a day, so a total of 10 grams a day of creatine. It's available in a powder form. And this is based on prior studies, both in Parkinson's and other neurological diseases, that indicated this seemed to be safe. So that's the dose that we're using currently, but we don't know of any results of that yet. Probably won't be available for a few years.
I had a question about the heart rate variability study and the period between heartbeats that we measure. There's actually many aspects of the variability around heartbeats that are measured in that study, and we do measure standard deviations. One of the investigators of the study is Roxana, and she's at the back of the room. So if you're interested in talking to her more, she can give you lots more information. What we've found is that Parkinson's disease patients have a decreased beat-to-beat variability. And on that note, I'd just like to plug that study because Roxana is looking for healthy volunteers, people without Parkinson's disease, specifically men who are over the age of 65. And it's a really quick study. The EKG takes about 10 minutes, including the consent form. And I believe she can even do that today after the meeting if you're that interested. So please consider that. And then another quick study question I had is there a fee charged for participants in the 23andMe study? There is not. Most of our studies do not charge a fee. Some offer an honoraria for your time and effort just to compensate you a little, but we don't charge fees to be in the study.
There were some sort of general questions about motor function in Parkinson's, or walking in Parkinson's. So certainly Parkinson's disease can affect walking ability. That's one of the key features, again, that is a cardinal feature of Parkinson's. And it can be related both to slowness or difficulty with picking up the feet, sometimes freezing of gait or sort of stutter steps can occur with Parkinson's, or hesitation with walking. Those are all because of the impact on your brain's ability to utilize its motor programs to do things smoothly and easily. There can be some benefit with that from the medications, but other aspects may not be so easily treated by medications. For example, the gait freezing sometimes does not respond to medications. So in those situations, there can be other cues or other techniques that can be useful. For example, like this metronome. That was studied previously. There are some other visual cues or verbal cues that can be used. And a lot of this can be taught to both the patient and the caregiver by a physical therapist who knows about Parkinson's. So, for example, we have a very experienced physical therapist here. Many of you have worked with her or participated in the gait and balance classes that we hold here. Those are really designed to give you the tools and the practical tips that you need for getting around these kinds of issues. So beyond just medications, again, training your brain with balance exercises, walking exercises, using these other sensory cues and tips to overcome those kinds of blocks in the motor programs can be effective. Sometimes using an assistive device like a walking stick or a walker is important to prevent falls. So we really have to utilize all of those different modalities and treatments to the best benefit.